This episode of Two Lost Souls is brought to you in partnership with langbuddy.ai.
Therapy, as we know, is all about language. Words and their meaning help bridge that gap between us and our clients' understanding of the world.
However, like anything in life, practice makes progress. And if you're learning a new language, LangBuddy is just the tool for that. LangBuddy is an AI language bot that you can talk to on WhatsApp. And it's not just about speaking either. It's about listening and understanding. LangBuddy can send you voice notes so you can train your ear to your chosen language.
That's amazing. Is it available in French?
Oui.
Spanish?
Si.
Lithuanian?
Tape.
Japanese?
Hai.
Swahili?
Ndio. In fact, there are over 300 languages and regional dialects available, so we could carry on doing this all day.
Well, luckily, given that it's an AI chatbot, you literally can. There's no waiting for it while it sleeps or eats. The learning never stops. And given that therapy and learning go hand in hand, we are pleased to offer listeners of Two Lost Souls 10% off your first month of LangBuddy by going to langbuddy.ai and using the discount code Two Lost Souls at the checkout. That's langbuddy.ai with the discount code Two Lost Souls.
LangBuddy. Improve your language skills by chatting with an AI native speaker. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, whenever and wherever you are listening. My name is Ravi Amrith, and you are listening to an episode of the Two Lost Souls podcast. The title of today's episode is Going Private, and we will be discussing everything to do with transitioning towards private work as a CBT therapist. As usual, I'm joined in the therapy room today by my fabulous co-host, the superb Michelle Sudbury. How are you doing, Michelle?
Hello, Ravi. I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I am good. It's been a roller coaster few months, hasn't it?
Yeah, we've been very busy, right?
We have been. And consider this, listeners, an apology, because I know we have been very sporadic with the episodes. We've been, I think, even more sporadic at getting to the email inbox as well. I suppose I'm going to be a bit reticent to promise this as some sort of return because we don't know what's coming around the corner. But that being said, it's nice to be back. How's stuff within CBT world going for you?
It's going okay. So I can't remember where I was working or anything last time we spoke. So I'm in a new job now. Yeah, it's all going well. Just really busy and feeling very guilty that we haven't really attended to this very much, have we, in the last few months? But here we are.
Yeah, and listeners, you are on our minds a lot, and the show is on our minds a lot. We do think about new topics, new episodes all of the time. It's just finding the time to cram all of these things into particularly hectic lifestyles. We've had career changes. We have had dogs, puppies, unforeseen puppies. We have had a whole host of stuff going on. So thank you for bearing with us. And we hope that if you are still listening to us, that you'll still gain some value from the episodes that we do put together. As usual, if you would like to get in touch with us, if you've got any questions that you'd like to ask for any upcoming episodes, or if you have any questions that you'd like to ask us about careers in CBT, drop us a line at twolostsoulspodcast@gmail.com or find us at TLS_pod on Twitter. Or
X.
on Instagram or X or all of these places apart from Facebook. We're not on Facebook yet, but Instagram, Threads, X, we are on there. So reach out to us on there and let us know what you'd like to hear next. So we have the pleasure of being joined in the therapy room today by James Eyre and Jim Lucas, who are going to help talk us through the transition into private practice. If you'd both like to introduce yourselves, first of all, and your background when it comes to therapy, when it comes to CBT, starting with Jim, if we could, please.
Thanks for having me, Ravi and Shell. My name's Jim Lucas, and I live and work in Birmingham. I work as a CBT, or primarily an ACT therapist in private practice. I've been working full-time in private practice since 2011, and I left an NHS psychotherapy role before that. Started off as a solo private practitioner and then transitioned into running a slightly bigger business, having some associates work with me. And so I give them clients, support them in their work, and they're sort of associates within a psychology business that I call Open Forwards. So a lot like the clients that you would see in the NHS, we're providing therapy for adults suffering from common mental health problems, difficulties, relationship struggles. So we do couples counselling. And more recently, I've got someone in the team to do child and adolescent and neurodiversity work as well.
So I'm a cognitive behavioural therapist living and working in Birmingham. I say working in Birmingham because I'm working from this room that I'm in now because I'm 99% on Zoom. I occasionally do a clinic in Stratford-on-Avon, but yeah, since the pandemic, I haven't really been doing regular clinics, but I did have a big practice in kind of Warwickshire, Stratford, and then down in Bromsgrove as well in Worcestershire. So I've been a cognitive behavioural therapist since, working full time since sort of 97, 98, which is when I trained. I worked in the NHS initially in a service for deaf people for 5 years, and then I went and worked in Coventry NHS. First of all, in their psychological therapies team, it was a mixed clinical psychology and other therapies team at secondary care, and then I had a split post working in their eating disorder service. And after about 6 years there, I worked at Woodbourne, which is part of the Priory healthcare group, and I was somewhat unimpressed by what I thought would be amazing, the great world of private practice, because they have nice carpets and a grand old building and everything. I thought it would be awesome. It wasn't quite as awesome as I'd hoped, and then that made me think, I might go into private practice and do it myself. And that really was my springboard into private practice. So I've been in private practice since 2008. And started off more with supervision. But prior to that, I was doing some private supervision, and then probably doing more therapy now than supervision. But I'm a one-man band. I've not set up a kind of wider business with associates. It's just me on my lonesome. And also I do some teaching at Birmingham on the ACT course, the high intensity course.
James, you mentioned nice carpets there, and I suppose the question I'd like to open up with to both of you is why begin to practice privately, and what do you gain by doing so in contrast to the NHS talking therapies landscape?
I left the NHS to get away from something, I think primarily, to get away from a service at the time that was lacking leadership. And so there wasn't really the space to do sort of anything in a creative way or an organised fashion. There are individual practitioners, caring a lot about their work, but without some kind of way of developing things together that had leadership and that had resources. We'd often have meetings once a month and we'd say, yes, let's do this. And then nothing would happen. And then another month would turn around and then, it was Groundhog Team meeting month. And I just got worn down by it. So I went in search of something different. And I had an external supervisor who worked privately and really encouraged me to explore that avenue, really helping me feel very good about myself, saying that they thought I had a lot to offer, and that I might enjoy the freedom that I would get working privately. And so I decided to drop one day in my job to begin with. Actually, I worked Saturdays to begin with, so I ended up working 6 days a week. And that got too much. So I dropped one day a week, did that privately, rented a room somewhere, and wasn't ideal. You know, I had a massage table in the room because it was part of a wellness centre. And I think this is a lot of the way that people start off doing private work. They rent a room in some location that's available, that feels close enough to what you can do. And so with a combination of wanting to professionalise what I was doing and thinking, right, I'm just ready to take the plunge, I decided to lease a room that I had complete control over, that I could then start to build a business around full time. And so really then I was just getting into a space where I felt like I had the freedom to do what I wanted, to work the way I wanted, to innovate what I wanted, choose my own working hours and structure my own week. And I didn't want to just do 5 days a week of individual therapy. And I could see that's what laid ahead of me in my NHS role. I wanted to get into supervision much more, I wanted to get into teaching, I wanted to get into writing. And so private practice has really given me the opportunity to do that. And so I'm very grateful for that, because it makes a difference to my, the fulfillment and the meaning that I get from my work.
You mentioned freedom and innovation there. What things in particular were you able to engage in that maybe the NHS was a bit too restrictive on?
So, for example, making my assessment process much shorter, being able to work with clients as long as they needed to work with me. I find that most of my clients don't come for just 12 sessions. And so while retention in an NHS context, I think, is thought of as being a sort of something that you should steer away from. You don't want to retain clients, is the sort of the message that you get, because, and understandably, because the objective is to keep waiting lists down and get clients through as quickly as possible. But the trouble is that the 12 session figure is rather arbitrary, as there's assumption made that most people will get to where they need to be in order to recover and sustain recovery within that time period. And my experience is that most of the people that I see don't. They do require longer and something spread out over a longer period of time. So I guess it's the freedom to be able to do that, to work much more in a way that connects with an individual rather than some kind of assumed group norm about what people generally kind of need.
Yeah, of course. We've had a former guest on this podcast say the sentence of talking therapy being like the sausage factory model of mental health. And I think it sounds like private practice for you has enabled that ability to work in a bit more of a person-centred way and actually step out of the boundaries that people within the NHS can sometimes feel quite constrained by. James, what about you? Aside from nice carpets, what else did you gain from private practice?
Yeah. No, well, it's interesting because I think I had a lot of that flexibility and freedom when I worked in the NHS, but I'm not sure that flexibility and freedom is available to people now. So when I worked in the psychological therapies team in Coventry, it was a really broad group of people. There was a core of sort of clinical psychology and some nurse therapists, but there were lots and lots of part-time staff from all kinds of different disciplines, and I got the opportunity to take part in creative and art therapy, do lots of different group work, to work with different disadvantaged groups. There were projects there on working with refugees and asylum seekers. There was all kinds of stuff. It was a very innovative service. It did take a lot out of staff. There were some people who became, I think, quite ill, just burnout really. It took a big physical toll on people. And it was a long commute for me from Birmingham to Coventry, and I'm on the wrong side of Birmingham to get to Coventry. And if there were problems with the motorway, it could be really tough. And then there were various funding crises in the time that I was there, and posts were threatened because the trust was lurching through various things. I think IAP services are generally a little bit more stable in terms of how they're funded, but I know it's not guaranteed. You can lose your funding. And so there was an opportunity, a job came up, which was literally like 500 yards from where I live. So I decided to jump ship from the NHS, mainly just because I thought, well, maybe I'll try. There's this hospital down the road. It looks really nice. And I kind of speculatively went for an interview there. There were lots of changes afoot, and the eating disorder service that I was working half-time in was going to have to move from their location, and they weren't really happy about where they were being shunted off to. There were lots of threats. There were big cuts happening in the trust. And it had been very stressful, even though very enjoyable in all kinds of ways. But I just felt like I needed a change of pace. So I went and worked local to me, because I'm still live very near there. And initially it was very nice, but what I kind of discovered was there was a lot of it looked very nice at the front, and the marketing was very, very good. But actually, in many ways, it was more sausage factory like than certainly the experience I've had previously. But the other thing that was interesting about it was, and I've been exposed to this a little bit in my NHS work, working with lots of part-time staff who were brought in through different funding for different projects, was I got to speak to a lot of practitioners who worked in private practice or had quite a mixed practice. They worked at this clinic or that clinic, and they had a private practice where they could sort of indulge their passion for whatever it was, whether it was EMDR or thought field therapy or Gestalt therapy or whatever. And so whilst I was working there, and because the way it used to work then, I think it might have changed a bit now. There were lots of people coming in using the rooms there. So there were private therapists who came and rented rooms. So I got to meet this kind of wider group of people who basically tempted me over to the dark side of private practice. And that was at a time when that hospital went through some big changes, and some consultant psychiatrists were leaving and weren't happy with the ethos. And one of them had a lot of faith in me as a practitioner, basically guaranteed me lots of work, that she would refer loads of people to me. And so I went part-time, first of all. They knew what I was up to. So I started to build a private practice outside of working there. And I worked at a place which is no longer with us, I'm afraid, called Tranquil House, which was a therapy centre in Lickey, heard of the Lickey Hills, down that way. And that was really varied. There were lots of people working there, psychologists, counsellors. There was group work, there was child and family work happening there. And I really enjoyed the freedom of that, and sort of being my own boss. And so that's really where it started. And then I decided I'm going to do this full time. And I didn't really look back after that, and I haven't. So I've just carried on in much the same vein. I've worked in a few different sort of settings with other practitioners, but it was really tough at first. I think I missed the support network of the NHS, the sense that they've got your back if something goes wrong. But it often felt like something would go wrong in the services that I worked in the NHS, because they were really, really stretched. And actually, I've probably felt safer in the end and more comfortable in my private practice, because I have got to that point where I can, in effect, pick and choose who I work with. And that's partly one of the reasons why I haven't sort of tried to. I didn't want to get into kind of management or managing a business or taking on associates, because I didn't want to be managing other people. I just wanted to be fully in charge of myself. And so that's how it is, really. And often when people ask me what it's like, how I work, I'm not, I kind of say it's a bit like being a hairdresser, really. Sort of self-employed, have some regular clients, lots of new people coming through the door. Some people just come for a cut and blow dry, and some people they want a fade, and it's quite complicated and takes long. But I mean I think exactly. I'm not going to tire that metaphor out, but it kind of is a bit like that. And I'm kind of informal in the way that I work. It's very pay as you go. I don't have sort of complicated financial arrangements where people pay for 10 sessions up front and they get a discount, and there's all this. I do charge different rates depending on people's ability to pay, and so I think I've probably got a lot in common with self-employed hairdressers in terms of how they operate. Yeah, and that's how the sort of cottage industry approach of being a sole trader and having a little business. That's that. Jim's web presence and your social media and your training materials are very, very professional and slick. I am somewhat in awe of Jim, because I just feel like I'm just this jobbing hairdresser type therapist who's just working away in the background. So that's my take on things.
Well, can I just say, James, as someone who has treated a few hairdressers who like to come in and say, I'm kind of like a therapist, it's actually nice to hear a therapist come in and say, I'm kind of like a hairdresser.
Yeah, it's really interesting hearing you both describe your journeys away from the NHS, because I imagined before you started talking that you both had really crappy experiences and just wanted to get out of there and do your own things. And actually, Jim, you didn't particularly love, and it doesn't sound like it was a great environment to be in. James, yours was okay, and actually, could have worked for you.
It was more than okay. It was fab. I really enjoyed it, and I don't want to go on, but before I worked in psychological therapies in Coventry, I was working for the National Deaf Mental Health Services in Birmingham, for 5 years, and I was incredibly passionate about working with deaf people. No one else was really doing therapy or CBT with deaf people, and I was very, very committed to the service, and that was great. But there was a time when it was brilliant, and then there was a point where it all started to fall apart, and staff were leaving, and the service went into a bit of an implode, and then I just kind of got out. So there were definite chapters of time which was really, really fulfilling, and I really enjoyed my time in the NHS. But I feel like private practice has been now the biggest chapter, and one that I'm just very comfortable with, the position that I'm in now.
And that freedom really to follow the kind of ways of working that feel right for you, rather than being contained by talking therapies or IAPT and what that requires us to do in our working week. I guess that must be quite liberating, being able to follow your passions and third wave and things that you're really interested in, rather than things that you're told you must work in.
I do wonder whether, because you're children of IAPT, you've all, it didn't exist when I trained, and so my CBT training was really, really broad.
Yeah.
I did the postgraduate diploma in social learning theory and practice in applied settings, which was abandoned because the name was too long and they just couldn't keep saying it. But yeah, and it was in conjunction with youth offending services, because it was so broad. It was about the cognitive behavioural methodology for all things, really. And we had lectures and stuff on working with personality disorders, working with sex offenders, it was just ridiculously broad. We had anxiety, one was really, really broad, but it was a really sound sort of grounding. And then my experience in Coventry, and also in a deaf service as well, because it was a specialist service, we had to do everything for deaf people with mental health problems, because at the time there were no localised services. So we basically had to be the psychiatric service for all deaf people referred to as, no matter what their problems were, whether it was conduct disorder or depression or personality disorders or anything. So I started off as a generalist CBT practitioner and always had that. And when I worked in Coventry, I was part of a team that managed a waiting list. It was mostly people with chronic conditions and personality disorders. So it's very, very different to your experience of very protocol-driven sort of IAPT work. No one really cared all that much about fitting people into disorder-specific pathways, but we did have some disorder-specific group treatments. But it was if you didn't have social phobia, panic disorder, depression, or anger issues, then you didn't go into one of those groups, and you got individual therapy, and you could have multiple diagnoses, and it wouldn't really matter all that much, really.
Yeah.
So I've not had to escape that, and we were very third wavy then. Partly because it was such an eclectic, integrative group of people. We were doing mindfulness meditation stuff in our team meetings, way back in 2006 or whatever it was. So yeah, I think things with IAP, things became very medical model protocol driven because that was the IAPT offering, wasn't it? And so it's almost like you've had that, and then private practice maybe is an opportunity to escape and escape those limitations in some sense, and to open up. But for me, I was never getting away from anything.
Sounds like a golden age, James. It sounds amazing.
Well, I don't think it was. There was lots of stress and staff burnout, and people becoming ill,
not so good.
People working way too hard. But the NHS has been in a constant state of reorganisation. That was something that I was tired of. That was something I wanted to get away from the politics.
Yeah.
I think generally, because it got wearing. The wheel kept turning around full circle. And you're like, we just do all this, and now we're doing it again. Yeah, I don't miss that.
You spoke there about, I guess it's sort of the NHS juggernaut, really. It comes with all the bells and whistles. You've got safeguarding leads, clinical leads, data protection leads, anyone you could ever need to fall back on just in case. How do you cope without that infrastructure? What takes the place of it if needed?
I used to deliver private practice training for the Independent Practitioner Special Interest Group in the BABCP. So people that are probably listening today are maybe considering setting up in private practice. And one of the questions that people often asked was, how do you manage risk in private practice? And it seemed to be something that people got really concerned about. My answer was always, you deal with risk the same way that you deal with risk in the NHS. There is something different. I think as a private practitioner, when I get on the phone to the NHS, GP, mental health team, which I can't actually remember doing because I've done it so infrequently in private practice, because it's just not needed to. There might be a sort of wariness or a hesitation to talk to someone who's not an NHS employee. And I certainly remember having that wariness myself when I was an NHS employee. Who is this person? Where are they calling from? Where do I stand with sharing information? But you manage risk in the same way. If you're concerned, you complete a risk assessment. If you need to involve others, you involve others. You make sure you have a supervisor. And so there are these professionalizations, professional ways of working that you would hopefully put in practice anyway, that would enable you to deal with that. I wonder what your kind of reaction to hearing such a simple answer.
It's great. It's a really good answer, and it's right? Like we know how to deal with risk. I think having lots of anxiety about not having a safeguarding lead to kind of ring up and ask things about says a lot more about us, doesn't it, as practitioners? And it's an area that we probably need to develop in if it's causing us a lot of anxiety. So if we're not confident, competent at doing risk management with our clients, and we need a lot of backup, that's probably a bit worrisome. We should do something about that.
I think if you have significant concerns about your ability to manage risk and to follow, risk assessment procedures and things like that without having to kind of check back with people all the time, and you've got a lot of anxiety about that, maybe you're not quite ready for private practice, or you need to take it very, very slowly. I think that a degree of confidence in your own ability to respond to issues like that. But I think I misunderstood your question, though, because I wasn't sure you were talking about risk. I thought you were talking about all kinds of other just sort of general policy framework. And there isn't a lot of need for that, really. If you have a contract with your client and you establish boundaries, you also, the fact that you can choose who you work with. I know there's limitations to that, but you need to obviously know your own competence. Quite often, I think, well, sometimes from my supervising experience, people in the NHS are asked to work with problems that are outside or on the fringes of their competence. Sometimes that can be a good thing in terms of it being a learning curve if you get given lots of support. But often it's not experienced like that at all. It's about being thrown in the deep end with something and not feeling particularly well supported with that. I think if that happens in private practice, you do have the option to say, I don't really feel able to work with this, and I don't think I'm the right person, and to hand them back, or to signpost on. So in some ways, you've got more control over case mix, and so you can grow your ability there. And then, but the thing that the elephant in the room with all of this is about supervision, really, about having good supervision and knowing that you can count on someone else to be a sounding board. I was thinking about this podcast and thinking, it's really back in the midst of time when I launched into private practice. I've kind of it's not entirely clear to me how it happened, really, because I've been doing it for so long. But what I do remember was that I started my supervision practice privately before I'd even left the NHS, and I was doing some private supervision because people had approached me about that, because I did a lot of supervising in the NHS, and there were a lot of people in these kind of mixed roles where they had some private practice. And I found myself supervising a lot of new private practitioners. Seemed to be quite a few at the time, quite a few counselling psychologists actually who'd set up in private practice and were very anxious about that. And so there was a sort of mentoring, shepherding role really in supporting people. And I do think having good supervision is really, and a supervisor who perhaps is going to go the distance a little bit further with you, who's got some experience maybe at private practice, is really, really important at the outset, especially if you're working more in isolation. So if you're renting a room somewhere and it's just you, your supervisor is really the replacement for that wider network, that wider team, until you feel much more established and you've got better relationships with potential referrers or whatever. I think there is a different scenario which I haven't particularly experienced, which is to be recruited into a team or service as an associate. And I don't know whether Jim can talk more about that, because I think if you take on associates, that you can provide a more supportive network for people moving into independent practice. But yeah, if you're kind of going it alone, as many people sort of do, and like renting a room in the evening somewhere after your NHS job and doing, I do Wednesdays from 6 till 9 or something, which is often how people start, then I think you do need to have a really solid supervisor, and that can really help manage that transition.
I think NHS jobs give practitioners, therapists, a lot of invaluable experience. And so I'm mindful of not wanting to come across as if I'm saying NHS bad, private practice good. No. Certainly not that simplistic. And while I, on the one hand, said I was leaving something when I left the NHS, I also am incredibly grateful for the time that I did have with the people that I worked with, because I worked in a very experienced team. Not an IAPT team, a specialist psychotherapy service, with a lot of practitioners working from different models. And I felt I learned an incredible amount from those therapists. And I left at the point where I think I was ready to leave, and work on my own in a private practice context. I don't think I would have been ready to do that had I not spent those years with them. And so anyone coming, as people have got choices here, but I think if you come straight out of training and you're looking to just sort of solidify your knowledge, your skills, your experience in doing therapy, there's no better place, I think, than working in an NHS service to do that. And And I certainly don't think that all people should leave the NHS once they've been doing that. There are choices available to people, and the NHS is a good fit for many, many therapists. And some therapists discover at some point that they want to do private work as well, or they want to do private work instead. And that's obviously where James and I have ended up, and where some of the associates that come to me and want to work with me have ended up.
This episode of Two Lost Souls is brought to you in partnership with langbuddy.ai.
Therapy, as we know, is all about language. Words and their meaning help bridge that gap between us and our clients' understanding of the world.
However, like anything in life, practice makes progress. And if you're learning a new language, LangBuddy is just the tool for that. LangBuddy is an AI language bot that you can talk to on WhatsApp. And it's not just about speaking either. It's about listening and understanding. LangBuddy can send you voice notes so you can train your ear to your chosen language.
That's amazing. Is it available in French?
Oui.
Spanish?
Si.
Lithuanian?
Tape.
Japanese?
Hai.
Swahili?
Ndio. In fact, there are over 300 languages and regional dialects available, so we could carry on doing this all day.
Well, luckily, given that it's an AI chatbot, you literally can. There's no waiting for it while it sleeps or eats. The learning never stops. And given that therapy and learning go hand in hand, we are pleased to offer listeners of Two Lost Souls 10% off your first month of LangBuddy by going to langbuddy.ai and using the discount code Two Lost Souls at the checkout. That's langbuddy.ai with the discount code Two Lost Souls.
LangBuddy. Improve your language skills by chatting with an AI native speaker. Both of you as well have followed, I guess, what could be called the sort of graded exposure kind of introduction to private practice, right? You sort of dipped your toe in the water first, and before taking a more committed leap into it. And I'm wondering, when that time did come for you to do it full time, was there anything scary about it? And what were your fears at the time? And if we could go back in time, if you could go back and give yourself some advice, what would that advice be?
I was scared of not getting any clients and not keeping any clients and not earning enough money. My fear was probably heightened, like about a couple of weeks after I handed in my notice. My partner was in she was knocked down by a car and broke her leg, as if like changing job wasn't sort of destabilizing enough, like something else kind of significant happened. And she made a good recovery, but that certainly did ramp up the fear. I think I probably just tried to do too many things and ended up being a bit of a busy idiot. I don't know if I could. I don't know if I had the knowledge or the awareness to do anything different. But there's something about keeping it simple and just focusing on one or two things that are going to help me get clients and keep clients. And probably something quite close to that is valuing the work that you do. It's hard to set prices. Probably one thing I would say to myself if I went back was set your price higher.
Yeah.
And start off with a higher price, because as public health workers, we sort of have a lot of us, we have a sense of sort of equality, fairness, and we often want to make things accessible to as many people as possible, and including making it affordable. But if you set your price too low, you end up working for less than you would have got paid in the NHS, working twice as hard to try and get clients and keep clients. And that's not very sustainable. I've learned a lot about business in, 12, 13 years. And I think that would probably be one of the things that I'd learned that I would encourage myself to do if I was starting that again.
That's good advice. Maybe do some business management training or something before you go into private practice, so you know how to keep your books and set your fees at the right level. And did you do a lot of research, Jim? Did you look at what the going rate was for the kind of therapy that you were offering and try and mirror that? Or
I did, and that's what most people do.
right,
And it's one of the worst ways to set your own prices.
right.
Because if you set your prices what everyone else is setting, then you look like you're offering the same as what everyone else is setting. So you don't stand out. And it's not as though you have to set a really high price in order to be perceived as having provided much higher quality. But a better way to set a price is to work out what income you want for your year and work out how many clients you want to see in a week, and then do the numbers and work out, if I want to earn this amount and I want to see this many clients in my work, how much would I need to charge each client?
Yeah.
It's a hard thing to do. Everyone wants to set the going rate, but the better thing to do in the long run is to do it that other way.
I started off on quite a high rate, and I had quite a funny experience. I was slightly put out. I went and did my due diligence and inspected loads of consulting rooms around the region. And there were quite a lot around Five Ways in Birmingham, big sort of Georgian buildings stuffed full of dentists and people like that. Often quite nice buildings, but then you get inside and they smell a bit damp and they've got paper flaking off the walls and things like that. But they look really great, don't they? And they're outside these big Georgian buildings. So I went to one place and there was I can't remember his name, so if he's listening, I do apologise, but I don't suppose he will be. It was a psychologist, and he had a very fancy big desk with an iMac on it, which looked really, really fancy. It was like, this is a long time ago. One of those like really lovely shiny ones, like a silver arm on it, and he was just sitting there. And he had an immaculate suit on, and I was saying, what's it like here, la di la. And then he said, what fee are you going to charge? And I can't remember what I said. I think I said, probably I don't know. I didn't really know. I was like, probably like £40 session or something like that. And he went, anybody can be a busy fool. So I thought, right, okay. So yeah, but he was right. He was absolutely right, because although you have this sort of guilt pangs about how much you're charging, no annual leave, no paid leave, no paid sick pay, no compassionate leave, nothing. If you don't work, you don't get paid. There's like insurance and things like that. They're not hugely expensive. There's not a lot of money, indemnity insurance, things like that. All your training costs, that costs money. All your supervision, that costs money. And if you are going the traditional route and not doing working virtually over Zoom or whatever, room hire fees are really expensive, and they really, really mount up. They really mount up. They were my biggest expense when I was doing face-to-face clinics. So when you factor all of those things in, your hourly rate has to be quite high, especially when you get DNAs. And then if it's DNA for an assessment, it's very hard to chase people for the money. I don't know whether you know any really good bailiffs with battering rams. But I was never into that, and hopefully none of my clients are listening. But I've never really chased up people for unpaid fees. I've sent the odd stiff letter. I've talked to other people who've taken people to small claims courts and things like that, but that's just not me. I write off non-payment of fees mostly. I just try to be nice about collecting them, and then if people don't pay in the end, I let it go, because I just haven't got the time or the energy to be chasing people for money. So there's a degree of sort of wastage and stuff like that, and people mess you about. You can have policies of charging people the full fee with less than 48 hours notice if they cancel, but again, good luck always collecting on that, and you can wave your contracts around, but again, people will just deaf you out or whatever. So you do get some sort of no-shows initially anyway, and sort of messed around a little bit. And if you sat in a consulting room somewhere and they're charging you £15 an hour for the room or more, and you've driven, for half an hour to get there, and you bought a sandwich on the way because you didn't have time for lunch, so you sat there, you're looking at your sandwich, you're looking at your watch, they should be here by now, and then you're trying to phone them and there's no reply, and then they're like, I thought it was next week. That is a problem when you're not earning a penny. So it's really important to set a decent fee. because otherwise you'll be running around working really hard, and you probably won't have much to show for it. And I worked way too hard when I went into full-time private practice. And I think the term that many people use is this fear of it's feast or famine. You think, you have to accept every referral that comes, and you have to work with everybody, you have to squeeze people in and do really long clinics and stuff like that, because you're worried that it'll all just dry up, and what happens if there's a rainy day, or what happens if you do break your leg or whatever. And I worked way too hard for a few years, and it took its toll. And now I'm happy to say I work a lot less. I earn considerably less than when the sort of second, third year of private practice. I've never matched that, because I work a lot less now. Because it defeated the object. But yeah, there was a fear, the wolf at the door. Of what if I'm ill? What if it all just goes to pieces?
I'm really glad you said that as well, because I've spoken to some therapists as well who sort of say I can't envisage working privately because ethically and morally for me, the NHS is the only way I can guarantee that equity of service to and not just serve people who can afford it. And I think it's actually really important, as you said, James, in setting those rates. It's your survival. Actually, and there's so many other costs that go into it. It's not just putting food on the table. And I'm wondering, actually, speaking of putting food on the table, though, I get the sense that it can be quite pressurizing in terms of earning enough money to survive. And I'm just wondering, how do you do that? How do you effectively sort of balance shepherding clients through treatment while also making sure that you do earn enough money to survive?
I think you have to resist the urge to do too much client work when it's coming through, because you need to work on your business as well as in your business. And so you need to have things in place that will allow you to get a client next week or the week after.
Yeah.
And so I'm very particular that I'll have a set number of appointments per week. And that gives me sufficient hours then to make sure that I'm doing marketing or I'm doing other things that get clients through the door. It's about learning to do that and sticking to it, and following systems, keeping your costs down, as well as like taking some sensible risks about what you spend money on in order to get clients, keeping on top of the numbers as well.
Fixing your availability sort of slots in your diary, I think, is really, really important. Again, those first few years of being in overdrive and slightly panic mode, I think I was like squeezing people in and working late and doing extra sessions. I did have a policy which probably stopped me from burning out, actually, of I wouldn't work weekends. And I would not work more than 2 evenings a week, because my idea was that it would be a sort of 9 to 5 job, just like my NHS or my working for a Priory Group kind of contract. And I really wanted to replicate that, but on my own terms. If you're too flexible and you've got that anxiety, you'll find that you're squeezing people in. And I do know of practitioners, CBT and other shades of psychological therapists, who end up with a poor reputation because they were just they'll work with anybody and they'll take any kind of work on, and they were just dashing from one clinic to another, one appointment to another, working in various different private therapy centres. There were people who sort of had a reputation. They were always leaving something in an office somewhere because they were a blur, moving from one thing to another. And you'd hear stories about poor sort of client satisfaction because they mixed up appointments, and they were just in a bit of a sort of headless chicken mode because they were just trying to cram in loads and loads and loads of work. There are people who get caught up in that sort of almost unhealthy obsession with filling the diary. Now I only have 4 therapy slots in a day, and I don't work 5 full days a week anyway. And it's never going to change from that. And people are always asking me, "Oh, could you fit me in?" I'm like, "No, I can't. You've got to wait until the week after next." And I won't take on new referrals unless I've got space to then offer regular therapy sessions after it. That was a mistake in the early years. If you get an assessment and you'd sort of negotiate, well, I could do an assessment the week after next, but I won't be able to start seeing you. Then you've basically got a waiting list for treatment, which is insane if you're doing it all yourself.
I have a question about kind of advertising yourselves, if that's okay. So I was a counsellor by background. That was my core training. And as part of my counselling degree, I had to have so many hours of therapy, had to go and have private therapy. And the advice we were given when we were finding our therapist was to be very wary of those with a great big long list of all of their specialties. They would advertise, experts in everything. Where actually, probably, they may have done a 1 or 2 hour piece of CPD, and then kind of labelled themselves as experts in that area. What are your thoughts around kind of selling yourself and really standing out in a bit of an oversaturated market in some areas, right? With the things that you do specialise in, how do you balance that and make sure that you're not, master of all to everybody?
Yeah, it's a bugbear of mine because it's really unhelpful if you're looking for therapy and you go on a therapist directory of some sort and you just can't tell who's a specialist in what you want and the problem that you're suffering from, because people do what you say. And I think it comes from a place of anxiety when therapists do that. Like, I need to make sure that I'm covering all bases. And I don't say that I only do this and that because I won't get any clients if I do. And it actually goes against kind of what happens. You're more likely to get more people get in contact with you if you stand out as being somebody that specializes in, say, X, Y, and Z with a particular 1 or 2 or 3, which some people train in 3 different therapy approaches. And so, yeah, I agree with that advice that you were given. Be wary of that because it raises questions.
Yeah.
And it makes you think, so who is this person? So instead of helping you to know who the therapist is and what they're good at, it leaves you with not knowing. So that's a reason why I would for helping out people who are looking for therapy, to find somebody relevant and helpful, as well as taking the risk yourself to choose what kind of therapy you want to do in private practice.
Yeah.
You don't have to be a generalist. You don't have to work with everybody and everything. You can choose.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of value in doing that.
And like you said, Jim, a little bit earlier, standing out from the crowd a little bit, having that sense of value in your own stuff and being able to sell that and be really passionate about that, it probably will drive more business, won't it, rather than the opposite. It's not exclusionary. It's people will be looking for that, and then they'll find you, hopefully.
Yeah, I mean, I've been a member of a business sort of community and organisation for quite a few years, and I've learned a lot just about business. And it's one of the consistent messages that they communicate is don't do what everyone else is doing, because most businesses are either struggling to get by or failing. And so if you do what everyone else is doing, then that's the path, that's the destination you're creating for yourself. So if you're going on counselling directory and seeing that, don't do that. If everyone else is setting their prices at £50, don't do that. You'll make your life simpler, easier, and more rewarding if you do so, I suspect.
I don't advertise, and I never have.
It's all just reputation, James, and word of mouth.
But it did start off from having a consultant who referred quite a few people to me initially, and then working in a GP surgery and using rooms there, and then getting to know some of the GPs there, and then them referring to me because they'd seen the quality of the work that I was doing. Although I didn't really tout for a lot of business there, but now I don't get that many GP referrals. They're nearly all self referrals, and they're nearly all you were recommended by my brother's wife's sister. That seems to be how it works. And I do ask now. I'm kind of curious about it because I don't advertise. And the consultant who used to refer to me, she retired a couple of years ago. And I did worry then, well, no, maybe the golden goose has died and I won't get any referrals. But she wasn't accounting for my referrals anyway because she was winding down towards retirement. But it's all based on reputation. I think I have to have a Bupa profile, and I deliberately wrote the most minimal thing on there. But I do supervise people who are in private practice, and they different approaches have worked really. Some people will use rather than I think advertising itself is not necessarily the route. I can only speak from my view, and it's very particular. That referral networks are quite common, whether they be through registering with private health insurance, AXA, Aviva, Bupa, or whatever, and you'll get referrals through them directly and through their networks and through listing on their networks rather than through your own sort of website or through advertising on therapy directories where you're one of the millions of people who apparently can do everything. Also, there are some specialist referral networks. People, I see somebody who does an awful lot of trauma work, and she's part of some sort of specialist trauma network, and gets a lot of referrals from them. She's a clinical psychologist, so she does quite a lot of sort of forensic court referral type stuff where people have got criminal injuries compensation from trauma, and there are various networks for particular skills. So I suspect that sort of professional bodies and things like that and interest groups around particular skills have their own sort of referral networks if there was a thing that you were interested in. Like the LGBTQ stuff, Pink Therapy, for example. I did some training with them years ago. I'm not registered with them, but they have their own little register for people looking for people who've had more specific training in those kind of models, for example. So there are some referral networks and things that are based around specialties. And then I know someone who gets quite a lot of business, who's got an established reputation, has built links with GPs, but every now and again they take out adverts in a local newspaper. But it's just them. They take out an advert just to maintain a profile locally, and they don't really say a lot. They're just kind of, then they'll pick up just a few referrals or whatever, but then things kind of carry on from that because they sort of pops into people's minds, and people remember there was that guy, or I remember seeing something in this local paper, and then they'll go and find his website. So there are some ways that work differently for different people.
We've spoken a little bit there about the marketing side of things, but I'm also conscious that, again, particularly if there are therapists listening to this that have been in that NHS realm and thinking about branding, that element of rooms, that element of finances as well, so things like taxes, accountancy, all that stuff. How do you navigate all those elements? Are there any resources that people might find quite helpful to be signposted to in relation to those things?
I think I'll just say this because it's just sitting there in my inbox. I don't know what it is. If it came today, there's a setting up in private practice, the first 5 steps CPD thing from the BABCP.
There is.
So there are kind of webinars and things that kind of cover some of this stuff. And the BABCP has their own independent practitioner special interest group, which is a really good port of call for looking at that stuff. Again, I'm a bit of a cop-out. My advice would be to marry an accountant. That worked really, really well for me. Although it wasn't part of the plan, I just happened to have already done that. So, that really helped me.
That's really good advice. I'll have to find one. I'll have to ditch what I've got, though, to do that. That's good advice.
There's some other things I'm aware of. I think they're still around. Things like Private Practice Hub is an online resource that people go to. I think there are a couple of Facebook groups that sort of focus on things to do, things to focus on to sort of get started. Yeah, there might even be 1 or 2 books out there, and some coaches and therapists specialise in doing training and coaching along those lines.
And also thinking that a lot of the audience of this show is going to be trainees. There may be some trainees out there who are already starting on their training journey, knowing that at the end of the process they want to pursue a career in private practice. And earlier, Jim, you spoke about NHS talking therapies being a good place to sort of cut your teeth, right? Learn a few skills, practice the skills you've learned as part of training. If anyone is listening to this and considering a private practice route after that, how long should they wait? What are the telltale signs that they're ready to make that leap?
I've got no data that can guide my answer in any sort of meaningful or effective way. I come back to, like, as an individual, I guess you kind of can choose when you feel ready to do that. Talk about it with some people around you, see what they think about it. You mentioned the graded exposure approach to private practice earlier. There's nothing like dipping your toe in the water and seeing if you like it, and that will give you some feedback as to whether it's something that you like as much as you felt like you wanted to do it. Yeah, we all know the anticipation of something and the experience of something don't always turn out to be the same thing, and so get in there and do it a little bit to find out,
and test the water maybe through some of these. There are various online practice networks, aren't there, where you're guaranteed you're not guaranteed referrals, but you get a bit of training, and they've got a sort of platform that you can use. They're always advertising BABCP quarterly newsletter and things like that, and publications, stuff like that. So places like that aren't a bad place to try it out. But I guess if you're going to carry on in private practice, they always take a big cut, don't they? I think, which is maybe a gripe for some people. But then that's a safer way, I think, to experiment with private practice. But also talk to people that you know. Most people will know someone who's dipped a toe in the water. But some of the skills in sort of running a business or managing a business aren't really they're not about therapy. They're not about CBT, really. It's about getting organised. It's about managing time management. It's about finding suitable premises if you are wanting to work face to face. But lots of people just use rented office rooms. And again, when I was looking at that sort of stuff, I got very hung up on it having to be a clinical space for a long time. But actually, people really don't want that. People really don't want that. And so, there are lots of, like Regis rooms and people like that, where you can have an office for an hour and there's a receptionist. And, as long as you're not working with people who are in an absolute state when they come in, it's generally fine for people to just use office building. You see, it's quite easy, I think, to dip your toe in the water without going the whole hog and throwing in the day job. I think that's the best way. Try before you buy, because some people really don't like it. They try it out and it's just not for them. And I tried it quite early on, I think, but I was happier staying in the NHS for, I think, 13 years. But I tried to do a little bit of private practice about 3 or 4 years into my NHS therapy career. So it didn't quite work for me. I didn't quite feel ready at that point. But I was still learning so much in my NHS work. I think if you're still on quite a learning curve and you're getting a lot from it, even though it might have its limitations, I'd say it's a good place to stick around until you cut your teeth, as they say, and then really think about it.
Associate role does give you the opportunity to do both. So the associates that usually come and work with me usually have a paid employment somewhere, and then they'll do a day a week or 2 days a week at the most for me, usually. And that's quite a nice setup for both of us. And they get to experience both worlds, compare the two, and They don't have to separate from like what feels like a very kind of integrated team completely, but then they get to escape that a bit as well and work in a sort of quieter, more private, independent space as well, albeit with my support. And so that's quite a good way to do it, like dip your toe into it, but probably seek out like an associate opportunity in your locality where you feel like you would get some support from people that have done some of that work before and can share their experience with you.
It's not irreversible, is it? I mean, the NHS is going to be around, hopefully. We'll see. And unless you tell your manager to stick the job up their arse as you're on your way out, you can probably go back to the NHS if you try private practice and it's not for you, or it doesn't work in the way that you expect it to. Or you could do that bit of, kind of hybrid working, bit of NHS, bit of private. So it's not irreversible, is it? But it is about choice, isn't it?
Yeah, and I know people that have decided, I don't like it, or I've enjoyed it and now I want to do the NHS again. So like you say, that there are always options ahead of you, and we tend to regret what we don't do rather than what we do.
I think there's probably more people in private practice, like part-time practitioners who have a foot in both camps, like numerically, I would say. So there's an awful lot of people who are doing that, and who are trying. You don't have to really choose one or the other, I don't think. And the NHS needs motivated staff and need to retain people. And flexible working and part-time working, I think, is possible. And so for some people, a blended approach like that is actually quite good, because it can feel a little bit straitjackety if you're in the sausage factory all day. But actually, it has its advantages, and you'll miss it when you leave, maybe. So maybe you need a little bit of time to do your other thing, your side hustle. And a lot of people are very happy with that arrangement and do that for many years.
At the risk of overly blending different waves here, I guess, someone doesn't need to go all the way to the top of the exposure hierarchy if they find that right in the middle, they're still able to live by all the values that they want to live by, right?
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
You've given a really amazing overview of how it is possible to kind of take that step into something that you might really want to do and work in a way that just feels right for you, feels rewarding, feels valuable. I think you've given a beautiful overview of that. Thank you.
Thank you so much to both of you for joining us today. It's been really insightful, really empowering as well, in terms of actually knowing that if we do want to make a decision, we can make a decision around where our practice lies. And just before we round things off for today, can I ask both of you, where can people find more details about you, about your work, about your practices, any projects you've got going on?
Okay. So you can find me at www.openforwards.com. And if you're interested in therapy, or if you're interested in professional training or supervision in acceptance and commitment therapy, then I might be someone who could help you out. And one of the things I do in that vein is I run an online ACT practitioners community to help people who work in the counselling psychology profession who want to develop their skills in acceptance and commitment therapy. And so you can find out details about that as well there. And if you want to email me, you can email me, jim@openforwards.com as well.
And you probably won't be able to find me anywhere. but I am open to I do have a reasonable sized supervision practice. So if people are interested in CBT supervision for private practice, then you're very welcome to email me on James Eyre, EYRE, at oaktreecbt.co.uk.
Thank you both so much for your time and your expertise today, and we hope you'll come back again soon.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
So, Shell, what did you make of that discussion?
It was so interesting, wasn't it? Honestly, like the level of detail about how to make that move from potentially full-time NHS working into finding a place in the private sector. I thought it was really helpful, really interesting. Could listen to them talk all day, I think. Great,
Yeah,
really
I
good episode.
totally agree. I think as well, just removing that element of it being a false dichotomy as well. You don't have to choose between NHS and private practice if you don't want to. You can do both. This is one of the few opportunities in life where you can have your cake and eat it. So why not? So I'm hoping that everyone out there found this informative and inspiring. Obviously, if you have any questions at all about what you've heard in this episode, or any questions or ideas for further topics that you'd like us to cover on Two Lost Souls, drop us a line at TLS_pod on X or Instagram or Threads, or drop us an email at twolostsoulspodcast@gmail.com. All that's left to say in this episode today is a big thank you to Jim and to James for joining us, and a big thank you to you, Shell.
Thank you, Ravi.
No worries at all, and thank you all for listening, and we will see you again soon on another episode of Two Lost Souls.